For over 130 years, the world knew him only by that haunting moniker. A phantom in the dark, a killer without a face. But today, science tells a different story. And the truth is far more terrifying than fiction ever dared to dream.
DNA from a shawl recovered at the scene of one of his crimes has incredibly found a 100% match.
Welcome to Witty Thinkers, the place where buried truths, lost voices, and unsolved mysteries are brought back to light. If you're passionate about true crime, forgotten history, and stories the world was never meant to remember, you've just found your home. Make sure to subscribe to Witty Thinkers and turn on notifications so you never miss the next untold chapter. Whitechapel, East London, a district of desperation. Nearly 80,000 people were crammed into a space smaller than a square mile. Narrow alleys weaved between decrepit tenements. The air stank of rotting meat, overflowing gutters, and human despair. Poverty wasn't just a condition, it was the architecture of life here. It was on a rain-slicked August night that Mary and Nichols, known to her friends as Polly, wandered the streets after being denied a bed for lacking 4 pence. Her body was discovered in the early hours of August 31, 1888, on Bucks Row. Her throat had been slashed so viciously it nearly severed her head. Her abdomen was mutilated in ways police described as showing considerable anatomical skill. The city shuddered, but it was only the beginning. In the span of just 10 weeks, 4 more women, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, would meet the same fate. Their bodies mutilated, organs removed, their deaths not just acts of violence, but messages carved in flesh. The press, initially hesitant, could not resist the ghastly allure. Headlines screamed. Sensational stories bled across the pages of every British paper. And then came the name. Jack the Ripper. The Dear Boss letter, received on September 27th, arrived at the Central News Agency. It was written in red ink, possibly blood, and ended with a chilling promise. I am down on whores and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. The killer had given himself a name, and the world would never forget it. They were not just names in a police file. Polly Nichols, 43, had 5 children and a ruined marriage. Annie Chapman, 47, sold flowers and crochet to survive. Elizabeth Stride, known as Long Liz, was a Swedish immigrant. Catherine Eddowes, 46, was clever, funny, and kind. And Mary Jane Kelly, just 25, was the youngest and suffered the worst fate of all. Their lives mattered, and their deaths changed history. The investigation became a nightmare. Jurisdictional conflicts between the City of London Police and Metropolitan Police led to critical delays. Bloodhounds brought in to trace the killer refused to follow scent trails. Curious crowds trampled crime scenes. Dozens of suspects were named, madmen, doctors, barbers, even royalty. Theories bloomed. Panic spread. But the killer simply vanished after November 9th. And yet he lingered in headlines, minds, and nightmares. As London streets trembled under the weight of unspeakable fear, the killer didn't vanish into the shadows completely. He wrote back. And when he did, he didn't whisper, he taunted. The letters that followed didn't just turn Jack the Ripper into a legend. They turned horror into a performance. September 27, 1888. A letter arrives at the Central News Agency. It begins like this. Dear Boss. Written in unnerving crimson ink, the letter boasted about previous killings, mocked police incompetence, and signed off with a name that history would never forget. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Whether it was written in blood was never confirmed. But the fear it ignited was all too real. The police initially dismissed it as a hoax. But then another letter arrived, this time not alone. 3 days later, a small parcel was delivered with a note simply titled, From Hell. Inside was half of a human kidney. The note claimed that the sender had fried and eaten the other half. It ended with, Catch me when you can, Mr. Lusk. Mr. Lusk was the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, a man who had spent nights walking the streets, trying to stop this unknown butcher. The kidney was believed to belong to victim Catherine Eddowes. A medical examination confirmed signs of Bright's disease, a rare kidney condition, just as her autopsy had reported. The killer was no longer just an invisible shadow. He had a voice, a tone, a sense of theater. The letters were printed in newspapers across the empire. Word for word. People read them by candlelight, breath held, hands trembling. Newsboys shouted headlines on every corner. Jack the Ripper writes again. Ripper taunts police with organ in post. He wasn't just killing. He was narrating his crimes. And London was listening. The press had turned a butcher into a myth. But who was behind the ink? Even today, criminologists debate the authenticity of the Ripper letters. Of the hundreds of letters sent, only 3 are widely considered potentially genuine. The Dear Boss letter, the Saucy Jack postcard, and the Haunting from Hell letter. Many others are believed to have been written by journalists to boost sales, by pranksters seeking attention, or even by police attempting to draw the killer out. It worked. Panic spread like wildfire. One man, John Pizer, a local bootmaker, was falsely accused after being seen wearing a leather apron. For weeks, the media labeled him the prime suspect. He was innocent. But by then, leather apron had already been printed in bold headlines across Britain. As fear gripped the city, the police scrambled for answers. Surgeons were questioned. Veterinarians. Madmen. Political radicals. Even Montague John Druitt, a barrister and schoolteacher, became a suspect after he drowned himself in the Thames shortly after Mary Kelly's murder. His family believed he was the killer. Another theory pointed to Prince Albert Victor, Queen Victoria's grandson, fueling stories of royal cover-ups and Masonic conspiracies. Even famed artist Walter Sickert was dragged into suspicion decades later. But in 1888, the investigation was chaos. There were no fingerprints, no CCTV, no DNA, just blood, gut instinct, and fear. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, it stopped. November 9, 1888. Mary Jane Kelly was murdered in her room, mutilated beyond recognition. Her body was found hours later, in pieces. It was the last known killing. There was no farewell letter. No dramatic escape. No arrest. Just silence. Jack the Ripper had vanished. But his legend had only just begun. Who was he? Not just his name or address. Who was the man behind the knife? What did he think? What did he feel? And what made him strike with such precision and cruelty? To understand Jack the Ripper, we must walk not through the alleys of Whitechapel, but into the chambers of his mind. November 1888. Dr. Thomas Bond, a police surgeon, was called in to help. But his role wasn't to perform another autopsy. He was asked to do something entirely new, to build a psychological profile. Based on the nature of the wounds, the selection of victims, and the surgical precision, Dr. Bond concluded that the killer was a man in full possession of his faculties, likely to be solitary, with deep-seated hatred toward women, and significant anatomical knowledge. It was one of the first ever criminal profiles in recorded history. The cuts told a story. Catherine Eddowes' uterus and kidney were removed. Annie Chapman's intestines were placed over her shoulder. There was a pattern, not just in the act, but in the ritual. Each wound was deliberate. Each body was left as if arranged. Forensics experts now believe this was the behavior of an organized killer, not a man acting in madness, but one driven by purpose. And with each murder, the mutilations became more elaborate. This wasn't someone unraveling. This was someone perfecting. Jack the Ripper struck between midnight and dawn. When the streets were dim. When his targets were drunk. When his escape routes were clear. He knew Whitechapel like the back of his hand. He didn't chase his victims. He didn't force them. He lured them. He spoke to them. And then, when no one was watching, told them, what if the letters really were his? Let's assume, just for a moment, that the Ripper wrote the Dear Boss and From Hell letters. What do they tell us? They're not just confessions. They're performances. He wanted to be feared, but more than that, he wanted to be remembered. The tone is mocking. The details, theatrical. This was not a man hiding in shame. This was a man demanding the spotlight. I shall not quit ripping them till I do get buckled. He wasn't just taunting the police. He was writing his own legacy. Jack the Ripper wasn't the first serial killer, but he was the first to be branded. The newspapers made him a monster with a name. He was no longer just a killer. He was a symbol of fear, of chaos, of evil. For the people of London, he wasn't a man anymore. He was the darkness itself. And that was perhaps his greatest trick, vanishing from flesh into legend. After the murder of Mary Jane Kelly, there were no more letters, no more bodies, no more clues. Did he die? Was he arrested for another crime? Did he leave the country? Or did he simply stop? The possibility that Jack the Ripper got away with it is what has haunted historians for generations. Because it means a monster walked away, unpunished, unseen, until now. For 137 years, the trail had gone cold. Jack the Ripper had become a ghost story, a symbol of evil that couldn't be caught. But time has its own detectives. And one piece of evidence had survived. Fragile, forgotten, but waiting. A shawl, spotted with blood, and something else. In 1888, at the scene of Catherine Eddowes' murder in Mitre Square, a patterned silk shawl was allegedly recovered. It was large, Victorian, and strangely out of place. No one collected it officially. It wasn't booked into evidence. It passed quietly into the hands of a police officer. And from there, it vanished, until 2007, when it reappeared in the possession of an amateur sleuth named Russell Edwards. For over a century, this shawl had passed down through generations. Many dismissed it. But Edwards had one belief. This cloth holds answers. Dr. Jari Luhalainen, a molecular biologist from Finland, was brought in. And the challenge was immense. This fabric was 130 years old. It had been exposed to hands, air, dust, and perhaps fiction. DNA degrades over time. But technology had changed. And for the first time, the silence of history could be scanned at the molecular level. Using a vacuuming technique and SNP testing, single nucleotide polymorphism, the team began to pull fragments of DNA from the cloth. And what they found shocked everyone. Under ultraviolet light, they spotted two stains. One dark, dried blood stain. Another, semen. The blood was tested first. Mitochondrial DNA testing revealed a maternal match to a living descendant of Catherine Eddowes. It was real. This shawl came from the crime scene. The second stain, the semen, was the real breakthrough. After months of careful extraction, testing, and matching across genealogical databases, the results came in. It was a 99.2% match to the maternal line of Aaron Kosminski. Aaron Kosminski, a 23-year-old Polish-Jewish barber, living in Whitechapel, mentally unstable, known to hate women. Kosminski wasn't a new name. He had already been a suspect in 1888. Chief Inspector Donald Swanson had even handwritten a note stating an eyewitness identified Kosminski but refused to testify. In 1891, he was committed to the Coney Hatch Asylum and later to Leavesden Asylum, where he died in 1919. He never confessed. He was never tried. He simply disappeared into silence. The shawl had more to reveal. Traces of a rare kidney condition, glomerulonephritis, were found in the blood. Eddowes' autopsy had noted kidney disease. Kosminski's asylum records also described renal problems, linking both the victim and the suspect through a medical condition almost forgotten. The match wasn't just genetic. It was behavioral, geographic, psychological, and medical. But not everyone agreed. Critics raised concerns. It was the shawl really from the crime scene? Could the DNA have been contaminated over the decades? A mitochondrial DNA only traces maternal lineage. It isn't 100% unique. The evidence, they argued, was circumstantial, not absolute. But the consistency between the forensic findings, Kosminski's mental profile, his asylum records, and the historical police suspicions was too aligned to ignore. And then came the most haunting question. Why did the killings stop in 1888? One answer, Kosminski was locked away. Institutionalized in 1891, just years after the final murder, his removal from society fits the timeline like a missing puzzle piece. Not a confession. Not a courtroom verdict. but a life quietly hidden behind asylum walls, and a name buried in dust. Until DNA exposed him. Jack the Ripper. For generations, he lived in the shadows, part ghost, part myth. Now, after 137 years, that myth finally has a face. A voice. A name. Aaron Kosminski. But what does it mean to name a killer long after his crimes? Does justice arrive too late? Or is truth powerful even when whispered through time? For decades, theories circled around aristocrats, surgeons, writers, even royalty. We imagined Jack the Ripper as a mastermind, a calculating evil genius. But what if he wasn't? What if he was something even more terrifying? Ordinary. Aaron Kosminski wasn't wealthy. He wasn't powerful. He was a 23-year-old barber living in the same slums as his victims. He didn't wear silk gloves. He didn't vanish in a carriage. He walked the same streets. He breathed the same air. And that is what truly chills the soul. Kosminski's asylum records describe violent outbursts, fear of food being poisoned, a refusal to wash, a deep sexual and religious delusions. His hatred toward women was noted. His psychosis was real. He didn't confess. But his mental spiral was documented. He died at 53 in Leaves Den Asylum. Alone. Unaware that history had been hunting him. We now know the killer's name. But this story was never just about the killer. It was about them. Mary and Nichols, the mother with 5 children. Annie Chapman, the flower seller. Elizabeth Stride, the Swedish immigrant. Catherine Eddowes, the quick-witted survivor. Mary Jane Kelly, the youngest, the most brutally disfigured. They were not fallen women. They were human. Abandoned. Unprotected. Society failed them long before Jack the Ripper ever did. Whitechapel in 1888 was not just dangerous. It was neglected. The women who died lived lives the rest of London didn't care to see. They were invisible until they were butchered. That is the darkest truth. The Ripper did not hunt in secret. He killed in plain sight. And no one stopped him. Because no one cared enough about his victims to try. Why does the name Jack the Ripper still echo? Why do books, films, podcasts, and documentaries, like this one, continue to resurrect him? Because he was the first serial killer the world watched together. Because the press gave him a name. Because that name stuck. He was the first villain of the media age. Not just a killer, but a character. And now, we finally know who played him. Not every expert agrees with the conclusion. Some say the DNA isn't enough. Some say it's circumstantial. Some say it's convenient. But taken together, the forensic match, the historic suspicion, the behavioral profile, the timeline of his institutionalization, it all leads to the same answer. Aaron Kosminski was Jack the Ripper. The mystery is no longer who. Now, the question is why? This case has lasted over a century not just because of the gore, but because of the questions it asks. Who do we protect? Who do we forget? And when evil hides among the poor and powerless, do we even look for it? Jack the Ripper didn't wear a mask. He didn't hide in castles. He hid in plain sight. He was a neighbor, a face in the crowd. And he got away, until now. More than 100 years later, we can finally say it. Jack the Ripper was real. He was named. He was known. And now he's exposed. Let this truth not just close a chapter in crime history. Let it remind us to never stop seeking answers. Not just for the legends, but for the forgotten lives buried beneath them. If this story moved you, if you believe forgotten voices deserve to be heard, and if you want to explore more truths buried beneath dust, blood, and silence, then subscribe to Witty Thinkers. We uncover what history tried to hide. Your support helps us give voice to the victims, shine light on forgotten truths, and keep these stories alive. Don't just watch, join the search for answers. Hit that subscribe button and step into the shadows with us.